Good to see you. We've had a really busy couple of days. We all hear me just fine? Does anyone need a Spanish translation here tonight? If not,
They start the right everything, whole team. I don't figure out my mind what DVDs. I'm gonna ask. So, yeah.
okay, so if she's the one that can do it, want a Spanish? I can kind of.
But anyway, you can start.
Yeah.
It's gonna be just. Yeah, it's gonna be like, I mean, very whole picture because I really, I come into meeting often because I really feel like we have to know what's going on. You know, and probably I had some questions that I'm gonna ask.
And we're here to bring you up.
Yeah, I called you. I called you last week. Was last week? I didn't see that phone call. I didn't go ahead. Yeah. My concern is just, you know, the issue we had in front of the building, but I know it's had nothing to do about it. But when we come in from the other meeting, when I write down, that situation we had in front of the building. Right now I have to ask these people to move that I could go by the sidewalk. And that is a change. How's my authority?
Thanks for coming tonight. So,
It's not odiando, no me prestan
the housing authority's been working with the planning team.
Yo tienen ahí and ahí 20 años. Yo tengo que pedir permiso para yo salir de mi casa.
And we've had a lot of interaction over the last couple of days. We had a big meeting last night. We had some great stakeholder meetings today during the course of the day, and we've had some stakeholder meetings and work that we've been doing in the past. And we'd like to kind of bring you up to date on where we are so far in this process. What we're doing, for those of you that don't know, is we're putting together a kind of a plan on the renovation and rehabilitation of the Hoboken Housing Authority, bringing the Hoboken Housing Authority into the future. We all know we've got to do something here. We've got to do something in our buildings. We've got to get them up to standard. And that's what we're investigating here with this. During the last couple of days, we've had a number of good questions. Before I get into the questions, my planning team's with me tonight. We've got some folks that have done housing authority renovations, rehabilitations, redevelopments from all over the country. We've got our leader, Tori, who's residing someplace. Oh, there's Tori. And there's Troy over here. He's with Tori Gals.
What company? That's the other Tory. Tory Gals?
There's Tori Gals. Troy's Tori Gals.
Troy's the leader.
Yeah. Troy is the leader. We've got a Troy and a Tori. So you gotta give me some slack between the two of them. So Troy's with Tori Gals planners, right? And we've got Susan with Higher Grove Associates.
Hi guys.
Right? We've got Jaime. Saying it. Is our numbers guy? And John's over here. And Dave back there.
Behind you?
Brian over here. John over here. And we've got a great team. Danielle. We've got a great team here that's working with us. They've done many developments all over the country. They work for the Housing Authority. I'm Mark Recco. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Authority. Erica Seitzman is one of our board members. Erica. Aaron is one of our board members. And Tori Gallus and their team work directly for the Housing Authority. They work for us and for the board. Now, they're not developers. They don't have a stake in the development. They're working out the plan with us. So they're not here under any other auspices except to work for the Housing Authority in doing this plan. And as we do this plan, we've been on a journey of making sure we have all the input we can possibly get. We've been meeting with the first responders and the police. Tomorrow we're meeting with the clergy. We've met with the nonprofit organizations. We've presented to the Hoboken City Council. We've done political leaders in town. And all of that has been focused on getting folks' input. What do we want to see? What would you like to see with a redevelopment, rehabilitation of the Hoboken Housing Authority? What elements do we need to include to make sure that as we fix up our apartments, redevelop our apartments, that we're set for the next 70 years? These buildings are 70 some years old. They're tired. How are we going to get to a place where we're absolutely sure that the next 70 years our assisted housing stock is here, that none of our residents are displaced, that everyone's here for the long term, our units are here for the long term, that we protect our housing, and we're financially stable out into the future? We need to do something, and this is a push in that direction. I think we've got the right team to do that, to make sure that no one's rent goes up, that we've got no displacement, but we give these units at the same time the chance to last out into the future. So we've had some questions over the last few days that came up, and what we're going to do after this is we're going to get up a frequently asked questions thing up on our website, and we're going to answer everyone in detail. But we kind of did this on the fly in my office over the last half hour. It's just kind of got some of the main questions that people asked over the last couple days, and I'm going to talk to you about some of them. Now tonight is kind of our wrap-up of our last couple days, but we will be back with you at a large meeting in October. We're going to send the planners and the architects back to do some more work and put in your comments, and we'll be back to you in October. And I guarantee you we'll be back to you in November, and we'll be back to you in December. We'll be back to you with this whole process and during this whole process, because the Hoboken community, the residents, the professionals all need to have their input to make this the absolute best living environment for our residents when we're done with this. This is an opportunity for the whole city to move ahead. So some of the questions we got over time was, why are we doing this since a plan was done 10 years ago? And a plan was done 10 years ago or so. Yes, it was. But that plan is 10 years old. Things have changed. There's new programs that have been produced by HUD. There's new programs that give more tenant protections. There's new programs that give us ability to get different and more funding for the rehabilitation. It gives us a chance to take advantage of those programs. So as we go ahead, we want to do this right and make this happen. We've got questions about flooding. As we redesign, yes, we're taking flooding into consideration. We're working with the city on their Rebuild for Design project. We're making sure that as we go ahead with our designs and our visions, that we include everything we can to minimize flooding around here. We've had questions over the last couple days about whether any new improvements we make will address accessibility for disabled individuals. Yes. We will be redeveloping, redesigning according to the latest standards, much, much better than we are now. I think we're okay, but we certainly have a ways to go on that. People wanted to know if they would see things in black and white. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. We will not be making any moves unless the community, our residents see it, unless everyone's informed totally of what our plans are. These plans are not going to, the fruit of them aren't going to happen overnight, all right? We had a lot of questions on, should I be getting ready to move? The answer is no. This is producing the plan. Once we have the plan, and once we agree on the plan, then we move forward with getting the architects started, with getting financing, with doing everything it takes to do something like this, which takes 6 months, a year just for the first project, the first part of it. So this isn't going to happen this winter. It's just, it's just not going to happen. It's going to take a while, and I would predict that it will take at least that year until we start working on our first project under this plan. So relax. All right, we've had some folks saying we're going to have to move, and people are saying you're tearing our building down. No, none of those decisions have been made. We're just in that planning process. Right? The question has been raised about kind of really who is behind this effort. The Housing Authority is. I think the Housing Authority commissioners have seen that we need to do something. That our operating budget is getting sucked dry by the repairs we're having to make. Our buildings are 70 some years old. the plumbing's old, the electrical systems can't handle the load that's expected now. And see, if we don't do something, we're going to lose it. We need to do something. And that's what we're all about here, is starting that process. And it isn't an easy one, but it's a doable one. Again, the partners we have done this successfully with tenant protections, making sure no one loses a unit. We're absolutely committed to that. Our board already passed a statement of values, and that's number 1, that no one loses a unit through this process no matter what happens. We had comments about not gentrifying a neighborhood. What we discussed was this idea, and I've heard this rumor going around, oh, you guys are just going to sell this to a bunch of rich condo owners. No, absolutely not. This renovation redevelopment is not for rich condo owners, for rich renters that may be in other parts of Hoboken. This renovation redevelopment is to preserve the assisted housing for low and moderate income people into the future. This has nothing to do with building condos for rich folks, and our board is committed. And by the way, there's laws here as well. We're not going to be selling these buildings, these properties, and going ahead and building luxury condos and making that happen. That's just not in this plan in any way, shape, or form. All right. The question was asked, are we looking or considering any other land in Hoboken? The answer is yes. As we develop, if we could find some other parcels of land, we could build a building elsewhere. We could replace one of these buildings with a building down on 11th Street or something. We could. We're looking. We're seeing what else is available. Is there a possibility to disperse our population, our fine folks that live with us a little bit, so maybe 20 units are elsewhere? Maybe. Those plans haven't been made yet, but we're looking at it. We're seeing if there's a way to make that happen. But those plans aren't there yet. Just going through some of the big questions. A couple final things. Again, I want to emphasize this. People have come up and said, what's the date? When's this going to happen? I don't know, right? This is a plan, a vision, and we're just starting. So this train is on the track, and we're not going to let it get off the track. And when we come out with this plan, it's going to be a real plan that has already taken a look at what it might cost and what kind of income we can get and how we can finance it. But even with that knowledge, it's going to take a while to get this thing together and to keep it going. And you've probably got at least a year before we're actually putting any kind of nails in the building or any kind of improvements to the building under this plan. So we've got to remember that this is a process, and we've got to remember that when you hold us to account, we're going to be with you during the whole process. You're going to hear from us constantly on this, so you know what's going on at each stage. We're not just going to go back and hide someplace. We are going to have a full list of questions and answers. It'll probably take us about a week to get it posted on our website to all the questions that came up over the last 2 days and any other questions you have tonight. Because what we're going to do tonight is ask for the questions to be held until we're done with the presentation, and then you can ask away. We'll answer any question you have to the best of our ability. But what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have Brian show a presentation that he's got on where our thoughts are so far in this process. And then we're going to stop, going to take a deep breath, and ask you, what other questions do you have? What other comments do you have? We're going to ask you, what else would you like to see when we get the chance to redevelop? What do you want to see in the neighborhood? What do we need to make sure that's in that plan so we don't miss it, right? We want to make sure everyone's got their input into that. So those are kind of the top questions we had over the last couple days, right? We talked about a lot of topics. We talked about security. The fire department gave us their input. The police did. The emergency EMS folks did. We've had some really good get-togethers over the past day and over the past couple of months, and they're all getting folded into the plan. So what I'd like to do is allow Brian to give us a presentation. And I'll say this again, for those of you that can't see well, you know, there's not so many of us, and some of you have seen this already. For those of you that don't see it, you know, let's grab a chair and take a look, because this is really interesting, you know. So you might want to come up if you can't see really well. Don't be shy. What did I say yesterday? It's not church. You don't have to sit in back, right? You know. So feel free to come on up so you can see well and see kind of the presentation. Yeah, feel free to come on up. Good to see you, sir.
That bridge, is that our area?
That's right, I'll explain that right now.
Well, come on up. Bring up a chair.
Perfect.
Where's the popcorn?
Well, thank you for coming tonight. Like Mark said, my name is Brian. I work for Courtyards and Partners. We're a firm in Washington, D.C., but we specialize in planning and architecture and multifamily housing is a specialty of ours. And we also do a lot of public and affordable housing projects all throughout the country. We have been doing them for over 25 years. So we've understood the transition between Hope 6 projects, which was kind of the start of a lot of this affordable housing redevelopment, to the present day, which is more of a different program that HUD has. And I want to explain that because some of the differences between some of the previous plans that have been done for this development, specifically the Vision 2020 plan, there are some differences that we're doing to hopefully make this more impactful and more pragmatic and implementable, you know, to be able to go forward with it. So that being said, we also specialize in like walkable neighborhoods and transit-oriented neighborhoods, which Hoboken is both. So this is a wonderful place. I'm really happy to be here and learn about your city and learn from you guys about it. Appreciate the feedback we get. So I'm going to start. This is just I'm going to go through a little bit of context of where we are, just to kind of orient ourselves. I'm going to switch to another program that is a 3D model that we've kind of built of the surrounding neighborhood and of the site, and show you some of our thoughts on where this project could go in the phases in the future. So the red outlines here are the housing authority sites that we're going to be focusing on, which is almost all of them. There's another site north in Uptown that is Foxhill Gardens. There's around 200 units, but as maybe the residents know, that project has been in a process already, ongoing process to renovate. It's a younger building relative to these ones, so it made sense to upgrade those units. And while doing that, it should be noted that they've been making sure that there was no displacement of those residents. So they're all being able to be moved around when their units are being renovated in the building, and no one has been kicked out in any form. So let's just go through real quick. The top one, if you can see my mouse, I'm going to try to move it around so people can see it. But the top one on the screen is Christopher Columbus Gardens. The big one down here that we're sitting in is Jackson Gardens, and right next to it is Harrison Gardens. And we kind of all think of this as a main campus, even though there's different property lines, but that's kind of one piece. And then there is Monroe Gardens and Adams Gardens are the two kind of standalone senior buildings. And I'm going to zoom in just to show, or again, orient people. We're sitting on Mama Johnson Field right now. Right across the street this way, south of here, is where my mouse is a parking lot, and we'll discuss in a second. And then you can see that, as we know, but just to discuss it again, as we back up to the light rail tracks and to the Palisades, which is a unique situation that we kind of almost one-sided towards Hoboken. We're on the edge. And then I'm gonna tilt this. Let me turn on my. I'm going to tilt this and make it just 3D to see, the difference between the housing authority and the rest of Hoboken is in person and in this view is noticeable, right? There's The rest of Hoboken is on a grid that was designed hundreds of years ago. It was designed for people to, before cars were invented, and it was designed for people to walk, right? That was the dimension of the block that made sense for that, and a good dimension to build houses on, and very efficient. And it's developed with cars now, and it's still it's very walkable, as we all know. It's a small city, you can walk most places. And the Housing Authority sites, when they were built in the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s and 70s, I guess, they kind of diverged from that, and because they were focused on automobiles and where to park cars, and kind of went away from a pedestrian scaled vision. And so it works against a lot of good design principles. It works against a lot of safety principles, and multi-transport, thoughts of being able to ride bikes or walk or push strollers around. It's a kind of a harder thing to do on this site. So again, we're here to help you guys, not only the buildings, but your neighborhood and your specific parcels here, to make them better for you guys and more safe. So I'm gonna scroll back up to get kind of reoriented where we are here. Okay, and then I'm going to switch to another program. So remember kind of this orientation where Mama Johnson Field is in the green. And you can see Mama Johnson here in the green here, right? So again, here we are. So this is a model that we just kind of created so we can modify and study the site. The blue is all of the buildings that we'll look at, and that are the Housing Authority properties. And the gray buildings are the existing blocks. So when we first start talking about what to do here, we go for, we want to look at the land that's available to us to start. So acknowledging the number one principle here, again, and I'm going to say this a bunch, but it's really important to know, is that we have 1,354 units that we're looking at. 200 of those are in Fox Hill Garden. So it's 1,154 units that we want to either renovate to the utmost best standards or replace with new housing. And we're going to keep that number, at least that number. And in that process also, no one will be displaced. No one will be kicked out of the Housing Authority because of this process. The idea is to build first something, like a building, and then that way we can kind of move some residents in and free up a building that becomes empty, that we could either renovate it substantially, or if we desire, if we all think it's a good idea, to rebuild them into bigger or brand new buildings, is what I meant to say. So when we look at the site like this, we want to see where there's some available parcels that we can start with. And Mr. Recco said earlier, we are aware of some sites that are off the campus, off the properties, that are interesting, and I think we are going to continue to pursue them. But at the same time, when we're starting this study, we don't want to go at risk and plan for something that would be great to have, but might not work. And then all of a sudden, the whole plan kind of breaks down if for politics or for another reason it just doesn't happen. So we're starting with the sites that the Housing Authority controls, and then going from there. And if we get other sites, we'll modify the plan as we go, and that'll only be a better plan after that. So the obvious one that we start with is looking for surface parking lots or vacant land. In this case, there's no vacant land on the sites that are large developable areas, but there is a few parking lots. One being on Harrison, right next to the Harrison Gardens building, and it is a parking lot that people park in and need, and we are aware of that, and we want to make sure we communicate that anything we do to that parking lot, those spots will be preserved during the process of building, and then ultimately replaced likely underneath that building. So we looked at this parking lot here, and then we also looked at the senior sites that have kind of more of a taller buildings that sit on a larger site than they are, and they have one side that's kind of the front, it is the front, that is green and has very nice trees. And there's a backside to that that is the parking, it's all asphalt, surface lots, and the loading and the dumpsters. And that's space that's, in a city like Hoboken, where it's very dense and very, filled in, you notice those as being underutilized spots. So how can we maybe use those to our advantage to, again, build as many units as we can on land that's not being used with its full value, and get ahead of ourselves so we can then build better buildings without anybody being displaced. And that's, again, the goal. So the first, we're gonna take our plan. We'll take 2 studies. We're gonna look at renovation, and we're gonna look at new buildings, because the new buildings, a lot of these are so old. Not only what you see in the units, but the internal mechanical systems, the plumbing, are very, very old, and as Mark said, are costing the housing authority way too much money to maintain, and it's only going to get worse on that. So we're going to look at some. I think the senior buildings are examples where those are younger buildings that can be looked at to maybe substantially renovate and bring up to today's standards.
If I can just add one thing, Brian.
Sure.
This was also what we heard from the meeting that we did August 11th. It's responding to residents that also had said, look at renovating the buildings as well as looking at new options. So that's what we're presenting.
That's how we started, and I think it's a great track to do both, so we don't miss an opportunity in either case. So again, either way, let's say we wanted to renovate one of the buildings on Jackson, or that needed such big renovations that residents we'd have to make sure residents weren't in there, so it would be disruptive to their lives. But we don't want them to be out of housing, so we'll build new housing and put them in that housing, the same as if we're building a new building. It's the same at that point. So either path, we'd want to start with a few new buildings to get ahead of ourselves. Scheme 1, so I'm going to put through here on a couple of these. We looked at if we added a new building on Harrison, the Harrison parking lot, as well as some smaller infill additions to the senior buildings, or either additions or buildings very close to the original building. And so you can see here, in yellow would be the new construction, in blue is the existing buildings. And
so, Brian, to build those, you haven't demolished anything.
That's right. That's right. So we're building on space that is underutilized right now. We would be making sure that the parking that we're constructing on that space would be preserved, either temporarily somewhere else in the site until we get this building finished.
How many units do you estimate would be in those buildings?
This one is around 125, but I'll bring that up in a second. I want to talk about the actual building type for a second. Just make sure I'm in the right. Okay, so this program is really neat. We can kind of live move around and show you and zoom in and out. So I'm going to zoom in and out, but I'm going to specifically talk about these types of buildings here. Or this let's call it phase 1 building. In order to kind of keep a baseline for the study, we're using a building type that is prevalent in Hoboken for new buildings, and it's also prevalent in the market, in the industry, and it's buildings that you actually can visually see. So this red brick building over here, just the east corner there, and then this new building even, and almost every building that's kind of been built recently is this type, where there is a ground floor that is made out of concrete, and then above that is like either 4 or 5 stories of apartments or condos or homes, right? And those are often made out of wood framing or sometimes steel, but that's kind of a dominant economical way to build buildings that last, buildings that are up to today's codes with fire and life safety and emergency response, security, sustainability, and well-being with air quality. We heard a lot of feedback today about the air quality in these buildings with You know, unfortunately, mold happens with old buildings like this, as well as you know, lots of kids that have asthma and other breathing diseases, and you know, COVID has not helped that situation for everybody either. New buildings take that into account, and we, you know, design buildings to help that. All the materials now are designed to mitigate any breathing issues, and you know, everything is rated to be safe in that regard, as well as designing central air conditioning, for instance. All of these new buildings would have central air conditioning and central heat, and even adjustable heat within your unit. You know, big improvements from some of these buildings, right? That's a huge life-changing event. I think when you go from a window box to something a little more controllable, and fresh air that can be brought into your building.
What is the floor-to-floor dimensions of those floors?
Sure, they're 10'8". So that's another thing. The floor-to-floor heights. You know, your ceiling height here is probably lower. It's probably 8 feet or lower. These buildings would have 9-foot ceilings in them, so allowing more light, and it feels better. And then the rest of that 10'8" is structure to the next floor. So, and these models have been designed that way, and it's actually worth noting that because some of even like Harrison buildings are tall in 9 stories, they have such slow floor-to-floor heights that some of these buildings will be not as tall as that, but you know, taller than you think, I guess. Or you know, you can see the differences between those two. Even though that one has 9, these buildings have 5. They're not like, you know, half as short. Anyways, I digress. So that's the kind of the building type that we're looking at to study, again, as a baseline, because we know that works here. There are a lot of examples of this just north of these blocks. And there's some just east of here too. And they can take forms of a whole block or a partial block in different sizes, but they kind of operate the same vertically. Another reason why there's a concrete base in Hoboken, that no one lives on the ground floor of those units. And similar to a lot of the units on the Housing Authority site, the first floor is raised because of flooding. And that's continued to be the case. There's standards to raise all homes above a certain height. It's called a design flood elevation. And we're even taking into account the future sea level rise, which is going to make that number a little bit higher, in anticipating that'll be a law sooner than later. It's another foot or so. But the idea is that the ground floor use could be parking lots, or indoor access, you know, controlled parking. It could also be lined with commercial use, like a small grocery store, or you know, health clinics, or community space is one that we're definitely going to be putting in these buildings. Including, you know, after school space for kids, you know, job training, those types of things. Those types of spaces can be easily put in these, and they can be designed with materials that and kind of I think Dave said it. They're metal shutters that can come down and actually help block flooding in those cases. Things you can't do with a house, because you want to get out of your house if it's flooding. You want to have a metal shutter there. So the ground floor can start taking on a new life of these uses, but as well as providing critical, you know, replacement for all the parking that you guys need. And we're aware that there's a parking shortage in the city of Hoboken, especially on these sites.
Well, just one other note, just want to make about the flooding. Just that there have been other meetings, we've been meeting with the city to really address this from a holistic standpoint, right? Of just, you know, because it's an issue throughout in other areas of the country as well as here, so there's a focus to address that as well. Yeah. We also have met with first responders about approaches for security, so when we're doing these designs, working along with you, that everybody feels safe in these buildings. So these are the continual meetings that we're having of just this holistic approach to this revitalization effort.
Yeah, in fact, earlier today during our workshop, we had we were talking a very similar discussion with residents right here, and over on that screen, it was the head of the sewage authority and representatives from the Rebuild by Design group that is a federally funded project that is trying to resolve storm surge flooding, especially in Hoboken, all over. But they actually do have plans for this site too, to build better drainage, so it doesn't flood. If it does flood, it's not as bad, or it goes away much quicker.
The individual who was from the North Hudson Sewage Authority recommended that, including in this design, that the elevation of the street be raised to a point of 8 feet above sea level, which would in this area be roughly 3 to 4 feet.
Yeah, we
included in your
this is not yet, but that's something that we can look into. I mean, these buildings are as you'll see, we're going to look at making a grid, and that can respond to that. But that's a lot of practically speaking. That's when we hear that, I would love to do that. But that's a lot of fill. That's a lot of cost to do that. So we have to take that into account. The realistic nature of doing something like that, putting 4 feet.
The cost of flooding is pretty high also.
It is, no, of course. But you know how it goes. There's a balance of that. There are some pieces of the site that are higher than others, so it might make sense to raise some of the site versus others to kind of mitigate it. I think the lowest point on here is 2 feet. So going to 8 would be a lot.
If it was suggested in the afternoon that to make a place like the intersection of 4th and Jackson comparable to new intersections uptown, I think the number was 4 feet or 6 feet to elevate the street.
Yeah, which is a lot.
Is it possible to model how much volume of material that takes? And since Amtrak is going to build over the life of this project a tunnel under the Hudson River, generating a ton of rock that's going to have to get dumped somewhere. If we look back to Battery Park City in Manhattan, Battery Park City in Manhattan was built on the rock excavated from under the World Trade Center. They dumped it over there, they raised the elevation.
Yep.
With all these construction impacts that we chronically suffer, living between 2 tunnels, looking at construction projects that are fed by diesel equipment, we're an asthma and air quality hotspot. So I feel like we should be looking at being a model community with clean, electric, whatever it is, construction equipment, because already in the summer, this is part of the worst urban heat island in Hoboken, if not the worst, due to the lack of tree canopy, due to all the parking, due to all the concrete and asphalt that we all ride up and down on. But when you look at the maps from above, you can see, the land, the buildings just get baked in the summer. And my feeling is that's so terrible for air quality in a neighborhood that already has terrible air quality. So I hope that as you move ahead with redoing the building, whatever, we try to do it in the cleanest, healthiest way possible, using people in the neighborhood, using materials that are being dug from right next door, and try to minimize all these air quality impacts. Because I think the project should make for a healthier community, longer lifespans of people, and that's the measure we should be using to measure the success. Not if we can finance it, not if we can replace it, but if we can help lengthen people's lifespan because we've improved the community in so many other ways than just the buildings. We should measure projects like this. This is hundreds of millions of dollars. So I hope it's well spent.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. There are a ton of, so to answer your first question, there is ways to measure cut and fill, what would be needed, and then I love that idea of using that stuff. So we could, John, write that down. Just kidding. We're taking notes tonight. Over here. No, but all that's good, and also reducing heat island. There's several strategies to do that with new construction. One is literally just adding white roofs, which a lot of new roofs are white because of the waterproofing materials that come with it, and then adding green roofs on there as well to absorb some of that heat. Also absorb water to slow the rate of water that creates flash flooding that you have here. So there's some dual impacts of green roofs that are important to use.
Would making the buildings taller and having more open space also mitigate this heat issue?
Not necessarily. I mean, they could be, but they're, you know, I'll have to. It's not a apples to, not a direct equation, I don't think, but it impacts other environmental issues when you go taller too. So, but yes, so when we talk about height, I think we can. Right now, we're using a baseline to just understand how the blocks might work, and then we can talk about if there are opportunities to go higher. We're thinking about that too. But right now, we're just keeping it there. I'm going to continue. I want to, because this is. I don't want to. We can talk. We can have questions and answers at the end, but I just want to keep going a little bit.
And I do, in that respect, just want to quickly say that, just to remind everyone, this is just a first take on the concept.
Yes.
Right. So once we kind of get the concept and we say yes, what we want to do is build a building here, then we start to get into the design. How tall exactly should it be? How wide should it be? What should the outside? That's all yet to be determined. Right at the stage we're at now is just to get that concept, and then we get into that. How can we make it greener? How exactly tall should it be? How many exact units can get on?
Yeah.
But I think where we are right now is we've gathered enough information to get the concept down, and we want to make sure we share that, and then we come back and share it and make sure we all buy into that overall process, or most of us, and then we go from there. But tonight is kind of the idea that one of the ways to move forward here and to protect everyone's rights and to make sure residents are not displaced in any way, shape, or form would be, for example, to take that parking lot and build a building. So then we can move folks into that building from there. And that's kind of the main point. And we're going to show you a couple other ideas of other spaces that we have under our control now that we could put some buildings on.
Right. So to go back to Jaime's question about how many, like this specific building would produce, we estimate around 125 units for this building this size. Okay, and that's a good number because that gets us ahead. Again, if you have a 125 unit building that's empty when it's finished, that means that residents can start moving in there from other buildings. And so, for instance, in this corner, these are lower density buildings. You could move almost these 4 buildings into that unit, and then that space would be opened up for either renovating those buildings or building a new block there that might be more units than was existing to again get ahead of us, so other residents can move into brand new units, and again the whole idea is to not be displaced. No one would leave. No one would lose their housing at any part of this process. You'll be moving, but moving to either a new or renovated unit. So that's kind of phase 1 for the big building on the main campus. And then we did look at taking some studies, looking at studies about these infill buildings, again on the kind of the back side of the 2 senior buildings, Monroe and Adams Gardens. So again, it's just taking underutilized surface parking lots and maybe adding some infill buildings that make sense to this size of a building and might offset some units that might be changed in a renovation scheme. So if we would renovate a senior building, those seniors would be moved to a new senior building, or we would figure it out. But the idea is that those senior buildings right now have studio apartments in them, which are kind of small, and new senior buildings don't. We're not allowed to build studios for seniors anymore. We want more space and more maneuverability, more accessible units, and so they're usually 1 bedroom. So if you renovate a senior building with studios and convert them to 1, there would be some opportunity, or there would be some cases where you'd lose a unit count, and these new buildings could maybe make it up. So this building here is 125 units in this building, and you might lose about 20 units in that conversion, but this building has like 25 units in it, I think was the number. So you know, there you can start seeing maybe there's a balance there where seniors could stay on the site or you know, return there. So we did that with Monroe, and we also did that with Adams. Adams doesn't have as much space, so it's kind of a smaller, you know, footprint, and so we have to figure out if that's viable or not. But that's just, we're trying to look at all options. And you know, in this case, I think someone asked earlier, you know, there's some space over here, but if you look at those in real life, those are the open spaces for those apartments. Those are mature trees and a very nice, peaceful place for the residents to have open space. We don't want to sacrifice that for necessarily. So we're trying to just use kind of underutilized parking lots. All right, so we looked at scheme one. I'm going to go back to the plan here. And the next scheme, and I said this earlier, so I apologize if people heard it a bunch of times, but I was thinking about this. It's like when you're watching a cooking show, and they show you all the kind of the ingredients and how to make it, and then all of a sudden they pull out a fully baked turkey at the end, and then talk about that, you know. And so what I'm going to show you is the fully baked version of the vision. But we should know again that every step along the way, this would be phased. So we build more units, and then residents could move into those units to free up space. So no one would be out on the street. No one would be losing their unit, losing a housing authority unit. So I'm going to click through here next and show you. Scheme 2, sketch plan. Again, this is just our first concept.
Yeah, it's an idea.
Yeah, it's an idea. So, but it's a very simple idea of taking the block structure that exists in the rest of Hoboken, which is about a 200-foot wide by 400-foot wide block. And again, I said this in the beginning, but new people have come. That block structure is a really nice size for walking. It provides a good increment to each intersection, and it's good intersection. It's good for a lot of reasons, but it's also very efficient in its size for building new buildings. And so keeping things regular and square help with getting good buildings on the site that work. And so the idea is to add and also add some streets back that kind of connect. Like 3rd Street, for instance, dead ends at Harrison right now, and it's kind of the end of it. But maybe we can bring that street through to kind of create a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more connectivity, and predictability on each time you walk a block. You know how long that block is going to be, and you know what's along there. Along the eastern edge. Western edge, excuse me, long day. Along the Palisades, there's a thought of adding a street that might connect to the this is I forget what street that is, but connecting to the light rail station. To kind of, instead of a dead end loop there, maybe connecting it through and making that a 2-way street. So with all of your famous one-way streets in Hoboken, there'd be a way to kind of reconcile when you hit that street to turn around and people could circulate in a manner that doesn't involve turning around, you know, in a 3-point turn somewhere. So that's one big move. The other is to, you know, preserve Mama Johnson Field as a community space. This is a great field. It does produce a little heat, and we should look into that. But it also provides stormwater management currently. And you know, today there was an idea that when this surface needs to be replaced, as they do every, you know, periodically, maybe the city could help make even more stormwater here to again help with the flooding issue. By stormwater, they literally build giant tanks underground that the rainwater, when an event would flow into those tanks and slow down all the water around and kind of store it until the rain stops, and it can then be pumped or drain away very slowly. And so it's another way to help with the critical flooding issue that you guys have here. And so you can see, you know, the phase 1 building's still there, and we just added on to it with another building and creating some blocks that might be 1 or 2 or 3 buildings that are kind of put together, but it's an efficient block, and it's very similar to a lot of things that you see in new construction in Hoboken. in new modern buildings. It's just an efficient way to do it. So I'm going to I'll do the next view here, perspective. Just to kind of show you the massing again, this is all at 5 stories, and it's just a kind of a vision of where we could go. Another thought we talked about is open spaces. We got some really good feedback from our last session about types of open spaces, maybe a pool somewhere for the residents. We talked about public versus private spaces, or controlled or defined public spaces versus undefined. So I'm going to pull up really quick here. Never mind, I'm sorry, I don't think I have it in this drawing. This is just the road network, the existing road network. But the idea of, the existing site here has a lot of like loose, open, green spaces that are not really places that you can sit and have a good time or enjoy in any way. It's just a lot of grass that kind of dead ends into buildings or is unfurnished. But the idea is to create meaningful spaces. One major idea on this plan, and again, this is just an idea, but is to create another, there's been some discussion about a resiliency park on the New Jersey Transit property, but if we created this new street and maybe contributed some of that space, it would become a meaningful size that could be an actual park that you guys could use. And it would also step the buildings back from the train tracks, so it'd be a little farther back. And it would allow for another really big contribution to stormwater mitigation. They've done a few of these in the city already, and they're planning for more. But this would be a great addition. And in these plans, they even have a very large pump system that would pump that water out to higher ground to get it out of the low-lying areas. So that could be turned into an amenity that all of a sudden, instead of having a back, if you go to the back of this project. Back to the Jackson right now, it's truly a back, right? There's really not a great sidewalk system back there. It's probably not fun to go back there right now, and it's dark because there's not a lot of lights. But in this case, there would be, these buildings could have fronts on this side that face the Palisades that are beautiful in the fall, and it could be an amenity that would be nice to have in your neighborhood. And then again, just the blue on the bottom is, on all of these buildings, is either space that could be used for parking in that kind of concrete level, or it could be used for community spaces. So we had some great feedback again on kind of our working sessions earlier today about these spaces becoming a community center, a very large, we actually envision this building here becoming a very big ground floor community center that would open up to Mama Johnson Field and maybe some more playgrounds and additions, instead of the building that's there now, and create a community hub there. But it also could be, essential services like we heard, the feedback of the market that was previously on the site across the street here, that was an essential to the neighborhood, and it was essential mom and pop shop for a very long time. And it was a loss, and it sounded like a loss. And it'd be great to kind of maybe find another one of those small shops that that could be a service instead of having to walk up to the shop, right, or further to smaller shops that might not have all of the things you need that are things that are fresh, So that's the idea of the ground floor, is we can plug and play those ideas and maybe make some areas of focus along these streets that feel like part of your neighborhood that can help out. That's kind of, what am I missing? Am I missing some points here?
Can you talk about the Christopher Columbus site, please?
Oh, of course, I'm so sorry. I have a tendency, because it's north. And let me just, keep fixing this. I'm going to hide this. These blue buildings are the existing buildings, but in this model I'm just going to hide them real quick so we can talk about this. And I'm going to go back to our map here of the existing site. And we talked about when we visited this site, and what we've heard from feedback is there is a really nice mature tree-lined open space in the middle. That's kind of a small park. It has a little playground in it. It's a very nice respite from the grid around it, and it's kind of its own little park. So we kind of valued that as a space that's worth keeping. But then, noting that there are some head-in spaces, parking spaces along the edge that is actually within the building line. It's not that efficient if you want to, think about new construction. And there's some areas along the edge which are, at one point, green spaces, but they're kind of unused, and they're filled with generators and accessible ramps now that kind of make that space not really worth, it's not worthy or defined open space that you could sit and have a conversation in or something. So we're thinking, how can we maybe, focus on the middle to, and then create maybe some new buildings here again to create more units for residents to move into new, and get ahead of ourselves with the units. So I'm going to go back to our proposed plan, or the first scheme, I should say, or the first idea. And we can see we just put two, again, the same kind of 65-foot wide apartment building, which is very, it means there's a hallway in the middle with units on either side and an elevator, and each unit has a door in the hallway to get in. Those are the type we're talking about. But you can see they're kind of comparable more to the dimension of what's being built, has been built in the last 10 or 15 years around here. But then creating that, keeping the open space for the residents, and creating a ground with keeping some trees there, and creating that, and saving it, but also creating some elevated courtyards. So I'm going to talk about that real quick, and then I want to stop and ask questions. But the idea of elevated courtyards came up today. Is something that some of these other buildings have already. And none of these existing buildings have, is internal courtyards, I should say, too, where there's spaces that you would be able to go outside that only the residents of that building would have access to. And so that's another level of open space that's often very peaceful and calm, because it's kind of a controlled space. And so if you want to go have a social event or a festival outside, we want to design spaces for that, but also have the opportunity for other spaces that you could go read a book in, and maybe have a pool in one of these that you could swim into. So that's another kind of aspect of these buildings that we wanted to talk about tonight. And again, so this is a scheme or an idea that takes all of the buildings, that rebuilds all the buildings kind of in the same fabric of the rest of Hoboken, and but preserves all of the affordable housing units that we have already, and produces more. And so there's this site. All of this includes about 400 more units than, or so. That number can flex, but more units than we need to replace that we currently have. And so there's, we want to discuss the idea of producing moderate housing, moderate affordable housing, instead of just the low income housing, but also moderate, which is the idea of bringing, some rents that are available for first-time teachers and first responders that are starting, the people that you want to live in your neighborhood but can't afford the rent just like everybody else. And so, establishing more affordable housing in that way, and having a blend to grow and have a little bit more of a mix of incomes is what we found to be a very good thing for neighborhoods. So that being said, I've talked a lot today. I'm probably going to lose my voice in a second. So does anyone have any questions or feedback?
Yeah.
Great. Let's start with you, sir.
Yes. All right. In constructing the new buildings, what sizes would the apartments be, dimension-wise? Also, I'm not too familiar, but I think we have apartments with 2 and 3 bedrooms. Would you shorten that? Would you make only a 2-bedroom apartment? Would you continue to make a 3-bedroom apartment? And how would that fit in the scheme of the new building that you're making, dimension-wise and area-wise, you see. And also the question is, who owns this land now? Does the city own the land or does the government own the land? And in owning the land, would the government be adverse to selling the land or keeping the land? Because now you're talking about median income. So right now, we have just low-income apartments here. So with adding median incomes, that would lessen the apartments that we have.
Yeah, we preserve all the apartments we have at the rates, the affordable rates we have. But there would be additional ones that would also be subsidized and cheaper, but just for people that are making entry-level salaries that are, you know, a good amount, but not enough to pay the rents around here. And so that's one thing.
Okay, let me say
Yeah.
this, sir.
Go ahead.
Originally, the intention for the projects, as they were called, were for people to come here, increase themselves in education and financially, and then move on. But as we all know, we have 3 and 4 generations of people in the projects here, you see. So, I mean, what would be the method to stir that or spurn that to where people would be able to live for a minute, build themselves up education-wise, financial-wise, and then move on? Would that be in your scheme as well?
Mark, you want to?
Yeah, I will. And getting over to that side of the redevelopment is, Ryan's just spent a lot of time on the physical side, right? But we've also got the social side. We've also got the programmatic side. So we would be having on the physical side more room for program space. And HUD's main tool that we have now is something called the Family Self-Sufficiency Program. It's not a program that you can force somebody under the law right now. On our existing units, you can't force people, but you can, and this is a great program, we can certainly entice people. And that program allows public housing residents to take part of the rent that they're paying and put it into a bank account for them. And when they successfully complete that program, they get that money and can go out and buy that first house, go get their education, do things they want with it. I've run 2 of these programs in my career, and I've had people graduate from there with $20,000, right? And so it's an enticement, and it's a wonderful program. During the course of it, there's a counselor that works with you, does a workout plan, and it's a way of taking particularly young people, when they get into this program, they stay with the housing authority for that 5 years or 7 years, and boom, they turn around, and by the time they're out, boy, they've got that 20, 25,000. That gives them their enticement to say, okay, let me go out and move. Let me go buy my house over in Hackensack now, because this gives me that first down payment. So that's a specific program which we are committed, right, Erica? Oh, yeah. Committed to starting. And we've already got it in our annual plan, but it really works here. It really works here because our operating money will increase and we will be able to afford that counseling, etc. But my overall point there, and then I'll hush, is that this redevelopment consideration doesn't just come with bricks and mortar. It's also got to come with the social element on what programs are we going to have for our youth. What should we be building here so that kids can come after school and get the homework they need to be done within good, clean spaces that make them valuable, as opposed to what do we have now, folks? We got the 411 community room, great. I mean, the karate program's great and all that, and we'll keep it, we'll grow it. But a space that we can be proud of and our kids can be comfortable in and have that good experience after school. And when I look at this thing, this plan, for example, I see all that space under all those buildings. That's a lot of space that we can do a lot of good things with. And to entice the rest, we've already had a stakeholder meeting with all the nonprofits. We've gotten them kind of excited. Look what's going to happen here. So yes, sir, I think the programmatic and social element is just as important as the bricks and mortar. And one of the great tools is that family self-sufficiency program that we can help people get up and out of public housing and move on, and then open that unit up for that next family that needs it.
And Mark, can you answer your question about who owns the land?
Oh, the Housing Authority owns the land now. The Housing Authority owns the land, and the Housing Authority will continue to own the land under this program. Absolutely, positively.
And then answer your other questions.
First question on,
Yeah.
on the unit bedroom size.
Oh, bedroom sizes now. I'll leave that to you guys.
Yeah.
But
The program that they're going to apply for funding and assistance under requires that they accommodate everybody who's here. So that if you're in a 3-bedroom unit, your family qualifies for a 3-bedroom unit, there will be a 3-bedroom unit for you. So that one-for-one replacement is a requirement of the program, and the right of people to return to a unit that meets their needs is also a resident's right built into the program.
And if I can just piggyback on the other question you was asking, I thought it was about the unit size, right?
Right, exactly.
And so, to Jaime's point, he's with the communities group. The other thing is the funding that you apply for. There are certain unit size standards. When he was just talking about like for a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, that I think we can clearly say that's bigger than what you have now.
Okay.
Right? Because remember that these buildings were built, decades ago, and there was a certain standard that had to be followed then. There's a certain standard that we're going to have to follow whether you do renovation or whether you do new. Okay, and so here's one example too. Like there may be some 4-bedrooms that have 1 bathroom for right now. So, but the thing is, when you do new or renovation, whatever the program is, there are other requirements that go with the bathrooms. Like let's just say if it's a 4-bedroom, it's 2 bathrooms, or maybe it's like 1.5 or 3 bedrooms. I just can't remember totally right now, but that's just an example, just to give you of these are the type of requirements that we will be following as we move forward, whether it's renovation or new.
Okay. And one more thing, my thoughts are on the children now who live here and don't have an outlet to give them incentive to do better. We have a sister, I think her name is Denise Parker or something like that. She does a thing every year, takes the children to a playground or amusement park. Would you have some type of incentive built in like that? Would we be able to take our children to a camp maybe once a week, and sometime those who deserve to go, give them incentive to go? You understand what I'm saying? When we have something like that, we need something like, because to just grow up in a city environment and not be exposed to the wild nature, that kind of diminishes a person's growth, mental growth, you know what I'm saying? So just things like that.
Yeah, I can speak real quick. We had a really wonderful stakeholder meeting with the nonprofit groups in July. And it was about 7 or 8 of them, I think, on the call. There were food banks, there were summer camp operators, there was the Hoboken Grace, who is a church but is a very service-oriented organization. In fact, I think they're doing a community cleanup here on Saturday. They were here today, amongst others. And it was very, very uplifting to me because often we go into some of these neighborhoods and they don't have those resources already. So some of those exist already, and there are people here that are really looking forward to a new development and want to support that. And in the physical side of things, they're looking for just some small space so they can be more of a presence here, and even just storage space to keep dinner plates so they can host dinners, and not having to bring everything every day. So it was very uplifting, and I think the support structure that this neighborhood has is there, but it always can be improved too. And I think, obviously the nature idea is a really good one. One more thing, because there were some other hands up. I don't want to. Yeah.
In applying things like that, as far as like children going into high school, would there be some type of a trade incentive, like a person who wants to be, if he wants to be a mechanic, would there be something like that for him? A person who wants to be a carpenter, would there be something like that for him? If there was somebody who wanted to be a mason, would there be something like that for them? Or you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think those exist, and that, again, I think what Mark's saying is,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, yes, we love to support that. What we need is that connection. See, we're landlords, we're not teachers. So we need to entice the college. We need to entice, and the high school was here today. We need to entice the high school. Let's come on here and do a trade program and link with our kids. So that's what we need to do, is be drawing them in. And what we can do is we can communicate with residents, we can communicate with community. We have space. We need you to come in and do this program. And we need your help, everyone out here, to push these and make these happen and make links to those organizations, because we are going to be here with, we are already, but we're already with open arms saying, we've got these new spaces, let's create these programs. Yes.
And just again, the outreach that we've done, we've met with the nonprofits. We also met with the education groups,
Right.
And so they're all, again, it's a very similar response. They're invested in this community. So it was also very, very uplifting to see that. The director of the new director of the library system was here last night and today too. So more questions.
We have a karate program over here, but most of the kids from here don't participate. They don't, I don't know if they don't like it or they don't want to go or what's going on, because rarely you can count the kids that go to the program.
Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead in the back.
Yeah, when she said that, my son, he don't even come out here, so if he do, he's special need. There's a lot of special need children out here. What programs do they have? What they will have, because some of them don't even want to come outside.
That's hard to hear, but I think...
No, I'm serious.
Yeah, I know.
I don't even have them come outside.
I hear you. I think that's another, point of... That's a point of connecting those social services that you guys have and the support, and making them aware of that maybe they can create some programs specifically for your children and those of needs.
Yeah, motivate the kids to participate.
Dave?
And also, in Brian's presentation, he talked about the varieties of outdoor spaces that you don't have today. Some of the courtyard spaces is just one example that there can be in a plan like this. And something that we need to, a planning team needs to focus on, is the variety of outdoor spaces. And these spaces can be tailored to meet special needs.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Besides seniors, which we know there are buildings for seniors, and the accessibility laws, and of course the need for accessibility, we also understand that there are special needs. And that's something that the planning team and your design teams should be looking at, will be looking at. And specifically to your point about getting outside, if we all, I think, can appreciate that the greater variety and type and the proximity to outdoor spaces improves that ability.
But I'm gonna tell you the reason why I do let him go to the store, whatever. He do go outside, but the thing is, there's grown men right next to my building is disrespecting my son, and that's why I'm scared of sitting outside. I'm not talking about kids. I'm talking about grown people sit outside and drink and disrespecting my child, and he's not safe to go outside. It's because of them. That's why he's becoming antisocial, because you got grown men up there saying, your child got T-Rex, coming up, disrespecting me and my son. And I don't appreciate that, and I wish it was more safer for him to go outside and be a kid.
That's true. We had the little park by the side of the building.
Thank you.
And mostly you don't see kids